2 hours ago, a Lloyd's List intelligence report landed in the inboxes of senior officials at the Pentagon, the National Security Council, and 3 separate congressional oversight committees simultaneously. The document contained a finding so operationally and politically damaging that multiple sources familiar with its contents described the internal reaction as the closest thing to institutional panic they have witnessed since the opening days of the conflict. The finding was this: at least 20 commercial vessels, including tankers directly linked to Chinese state energy companies, have successfully transited the Strait of Hormuz over the past 3 weeks, not through American naval escort, not through coordinated Allied protection, but by paying a fee to Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps naval remnants who are now operating a systematic passage authorization system from what remains of their coastal infrastructure. 20 vessels, 20 payments. 20 successful transits that bypassed the American naval presence entirely and moved under what internal documents are now calling, with a clinical precision that barely conceals the strategic horror underneath, Tehran-approved routing. The United States Navy has 2 carrier strike groups within operational range of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's conventional naval fleet has been reduced to approximately 10% of its pre-conflict capacity, and Iranian forces are collecting passage fees from Chinese tankers while American warships watch from positions that were supposed to represent total maritime dominance. This is not a skirmish. This is not an isolated incident. This is the single most damaging strategic image of the entire conflict, and it arrived on a morning when the White House was already managing 3 other crises simultaneously. To understand what this passage fee system actually represents, you have to understand what the Strait of Hormuz means in strategic terms beyond the economic data that gets recited in every energy briefing. 20% of globally traded oil passes through a waterway that is at its narrowest point only 21 miles wide. The ability to guarantee free passage through that choke point is not merely a commercial interest. It is the foundational demonstration of American naval power in the region. Every American alliance in the Gulf, every basing agreement, every defense commitment to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait rests on an underlying assumption that the United States Navy can and will ensure that waterway remains open to Allied and neutral shipping. When IRGC remnants, operating from improvised coastal positions with a fleet that American strikes have reduced to a fraction of its former capacity, successfully extract payment from Chinese tankers for the right to pass through water that American carrier groups are physically present to protect, that assumption does not just crack, it shatters. Publicly. In front of every government in the world that has been watching this conflict to determine whether American military power in the region is as decisive as Washington has been claiming. The Chinese angle is the one that has produced the longest and most uncomfortable silences inside the administration. Beijing has not acknowledged the payments, it has not denied them. Chinese Foreign Ministry statements on the conflict have maintained a consistent position of calling for diplomatic resolution while declining to endorse either side's military actions. But the tankers moving under Tehran-approved routing are not freelance operators. They are vessels linked to CNOOC, Sinopec, and CNPC, the 3 state energy companies that operate as instruments of Chinese foreign policy as much as commercial enterprises. When those vessels pay passage fees to IRGC naval forces, they are not making a commercial decision, they are making a political one. They are demonstrating, in the most visible and operationally concrete way possible, that China has chosen to recognize Iranian authority over the Strait of Hormuz rather than defer to the American naval presence that is theoretically guaranteeing free passage for everyone. That choice did not require a diplomatic statement or a Security Council resolution. It required only a wire transfer and a course heading, and the message it sends to every other nation watching is not subtle. American military dominance in the Gulf is negotiable. Iranian leverage, even after a devastating conventional defeat, is real. Choose accordingly. But this is where it gets serious. Because the passage fee scandal is not only a strategic embarrassment, it is a political catastrophe for a president who has staked his entire foreign policy legacy on the argument that strength projects strength and that American military action produces American-defined outcomes. Trump has described the conflict in terms of total victory at every public opportunity. He has told rally crowds that Iran has been brought to its knees. He has told financial media that the energy markets will stabilize once the military operation concludes. He has told allied governments privately, according to diplomatic sources in two Gulf capitals, that the Strait of Hormuz will be under uncontested international navigation authority within 60 days of the operation's completion. Against that backdrop of declared victory and promised outcomes, the image of Chinese tankers paying IRGC passage fees while American carrier groups sit 10 miles away is not merely an inconvenient news story, it is direct, documented, operational evidence that the outcome Trump promised is not the outcome the war has produced. The waterway he said would be free is not free. The Iranian capacity he said had been eliminated has not been eliminated. The dominance he said America had established has not been established. And the country that is most visibly and profitably exploiting that gap between Trump's claims and the operational reality is the country that Trump has spent his entire political career positioning as America's primary strategic adversary. The mechanism Iran used to establish the passage fee system is the part that reveals the deepest strategic miscalculation in the original operational planning. American and Israeli strikes successfully destroyed Iran's conventional naval fleet, its fixed coastal defense installations, its port infrastructure, and its centralized command facilities. What the strikes did not, and arguably could not, destroy was the IRGC's distributed asymmetric capacity. Small boat squadrons operating from improvised coastal positions. Limpet mine deployment teams operating in cells of 3 to 5 personnel. Shore-based anti-ship missile units that dispersed into civilian infrastructure before the first strike package arrived. The Maham 3 and Maham 7 limpet mines that American intelligence has now confirmed are deployed in Hormuz. Approach waters do not require a navy to plant. They require divers, small boats, and a coastline. Iran still has all three. The naval mining operation has reduced commercial traffic through the strait to a near standstill for vessels unwilling or unable to pay passage fees. It has not stopped traffic entirely, it has monetized it. That distinction is strategically significant in a way that the administration's public framing has not acknowledged and may not be able to acknowledge without undermining the entire victory narrative. What happened next in the Northern Theater added a second layer of pressure to an administration already struggling to contain the Hormuz narrative. The 25th of March registered as the most intense day of combat on the Israel-Lebanon border since the conflict's opening phase. Hezbollah executed 105 separate attack sequences against Israeli territory, a number that reflects not a military organization on the verge of collapse, but one executing a deliberate saturation strategy designed to exhaust Iron Dome interceptor capacity through volume rather than precision. The attack profile was not limited to rockets. Kamikaze drone swarms operating in coordinated waves, anti-tank missile engagements against border positions, and precision strikes on infrastructure targets combine to create a multi-domain pressure that Israeli air defense systems are designed to handle in isolation but struggle to manage simultaneously. 80% of the civilian population in northern Israel is now either sheltering or has been evacuated southward. The economic disruption to Israel's northern agricultural and industrial zones is compounding by the week, and the Israeli public, which registered strong support for military action in the conflict's opening days, is showing measurable fracture lines in its domestic consensus that Israeli political analysts are describing with increasing urgency. The Hezbollah saturation tactic is not designed to defeat Israel militarily, it is designed to make the cost of the war's continuation feel unbearable to Israeli society, while Israeli military objectives remain unachieved. Every Iron Dome interceptor fired costs between $40,000 and $100,000. Every evacuation of a northern community costs Israeli economic output that cannot be recovered. Every week of continued conflict in the north is a week in which the gap between the war's promised outcomes and its actual costs becomes more visible to Israeli voters. Netanyahu's government is absorbing this pressure from its own public at the same moment it is applying pressure on Washington to maintain military commitments that Trump's domestic political situation is making increasingly difficult to sustain. Trump's leadership crisis in this moment is not theoretical, it is geometric. On the Hormuz front, he cannot order direct military action against the IRGC passage fee operation without risking an incident with Chinese vessels that escalates the conflict into dimensions the administration has no framework for managing. He cannot publicly acknowledge the passage fee system exists without confirming that the victory he has been claiming is incomplete in its most strategically visible dimension. He cannot ignore it because it is now documented in Lloyd's List intelligence reports that are circulating in every Allied capital and in every energy company boardroom on the planet. On the Israeli front, he cannot reduce American military commitment without triggering a political rupture with a coalition partner whose support gave the operation its initial justification. He cannot increase it without accelerating the domestic political fracture that his own internal polling is already measuring in 3 swing states. And he cannot thread the gap between those 2 positions without a negotiated settlement, which requires Iranian agreement to terms that the IRGC, now demonstrating that it retains meaningful operational leverage even in defeat, has no immediate incentive to accept. The American business community's reaction to the Hormuz passage fee revelations has been unambiguous and swift. Insurance premiums for Gulf routing have reached levels that make alternative routes economically rational for any vessel not specifically contracted to Gulf delivery points. LNG tankers are rerouting through the Cape of Good Hope at significant cost and delay penalties rather than accept the combination of mining risk and passage fee exposure in Hormuz approach waters. The American Petroleum Institute has privately communicated to White House economic advisors that if current conditions persist for another 30 days, domestic gasoline prices will reflect the disruption in ways that will be politically measurable before the end of the quarter. Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, and Citigroup have all revised their Gulf risk premium models upward in the past 10 days, with the passage fee revelation accelerating a trend that was already moving in the wrong direction. Internationally, the passage fee scandal has produced reactions that compound rather than relieve the American position. The European Union's foreign policy chief described the situation in the Strait as evidence that the military operations objectives and the operation's actual outcomes have diverged in ways that require immediate diplomatic reassessment. Japan, which depends on Gulf crude for over 90% of its oil imports, has sent emergency communications to both Washington and Tehran through its own diplomatic channels, seeking clarification on routing guarantees that American naval presence was supposed to make unnecessary. South Korea has taken similar steps. Both governments are close American allies. Both are now hedging their exposure to American naval guarantees in the world's most critical waterway by opening parallel communication channels with the Iranian side. The image of that hedging, of allied governments quietly exploring Iranian passage arrangements as a backup to American guarantees, is the image that a president who promised total victory cannot afford to have become the defining visual of this conflict's middle phase. 2 hours ago, a Lloyd's List report confirmed what American naval commanders already knew and what the White House has been trying to manage without acknowledging publicly. Iran controls Hormuz not because its navy is intact. Its navy is not intact. Iran controls Hormuz because it planted enough mines, dispersed enough small boat capability, and maintained enough asymmetric capacity to make the strait functionally ungovernable for vessels unwilling to pay for Iranian permission to cross it. Trump promised the world a free and open strait under American protection. What the world got instead is a strait where Chinese state tankers pay IRGC passage fees, while American carrier groups maintain a presence that is large enough to be strategically visible and not large enough to be operationally decisive. Washington wanted total control of the world's most important waterway. It got a passage fee system that is funding the regime it was trying to destroy. And the president who told America this war would be quick, clean, and definitively won is now the president who cannot explain, at a public podium, why Chinese tankers are paying Iran for the right to sail past his navy,